We'll now begin the last plenary session titled North Korea's Nuclear Threat. This session will be moderated by Dr. Sumi Terry from the Council on Foreign Relations. Dr. Terry, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. It's now 4:25 p.m., and thanks for everybody who's stuck it out this long and here to listen to our final panel. I do want to thank Honorary Chairman M.J. Chung, he's not here, and Chae-gang, and obviously the Asan Institute for inviting me here today and putting together this outstanding panel to talk about North Korean threat. You have all the speakers' extended bios in the booklets, so I'm going to skip the extended bios and just briefly introduce the panelists. So starting on my left here, we have Ambassador An Ho-young, Chair Professor of North Korea Studies at Gyeongnam University. He served as South Korea's ambassador to United States. He also served as the Deputy Minister for Trade, Ambassador to the European Union, Belgium, and First Vice Foreign Minister. And next to him, we have Dr. Naoko Aoki, Associate Political Scientist at RAND, specializes in East Asian security issues, North Korean nuclear problem, American alliances in Asia, served as a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, and professional experience includes a nuclear security fellowship at the U.S. House of Representatives. Then next to Dr. Aoki, we have Dr. Bruce Bennett, Senior Defense Analyst at RAND, also professor at the Pardee RAND Graduate School, specializes in asymmetric threats such as nuclear weapons and other WMD, with a focus on new strategies and technologies to counter these threats. And then we have Ambassador John Everard, former UK ambassador to North Korea, previously also served as ambassador to Belarus and Uruguay, and was appointed as the Pantek Fellow at Stanford University, where he published a book entitled Only Beautiful Please, a British diplomat in North Korea, discussing his experience in North Korea. And then we have Professor Su Hao. He's an emeritus professor at China Foreign Affairs University. He's the president of the Beijing Geopolitical Strategy and Development Association. His specialties is on China's foreign and security policy, strategic studies, international relations in the Asia-Pacific region, and so on. And then in the empty chair, we will have Mr. Morimoto Satoshi, he's former foreign minister who also served as a special advisor to the Minister of Defense. He will be joining us a little bit later. I think he has another roundtable or something that he's attending, but he'll be joining us very soon. So before we begin, I think what we are going to do, if that's okay, is we're going to actually have Dr. Naoko Aoki talk a little bit about her experiences and her observations from North Korea, because she's a former journalist too. I didn't say this part a little bit earlier, but she's a former journalist who has visited North Korea 18 times on reporting on trips. So maybe we start with you before we actually start the panel. Just a few minutes on your observations from your 18 trips to Pyongyang.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Terry, and thank you. I'd like to first thank the Asan Institute for involving me in this very important conversation. And I'm also very deeply humbled to talk about my experience about North Korea, given the deep North Korea expertise in the room, and I also know that I am not the only one who has visited or stayed in North Korea, given the UK ambassador to North Korea on the panel, and I know there are academics who still have participants who still have interactions with the North Koreans. But I will offer a little bit briefly my experience, and again, this was as a journalist, so I have an unconventional background. I was a journalist for a long time before I became a researcher, and I think I will just note 2 points that are perhaps not very clear from the outside. One is that North Korea actually cares about how it's perceived, how it's portrayed by the non-North Korean media. And I learned this through my experience, of course, and it's also important this is important because this means that if North Korea invites certain journalists to the country, or to allow journalists from other countries to cover certain events, it usually is an indicator of which countries North Korea wants to improve relations with. It also means it's a really hard job for the journalists, because while journalists in general are on a shorter leash, I would say, than people they're on official status. I'm not saying that means that people on official status have an easier job. That's definitely not true. But North Korea knows that they cannot. The North Koreans know that they cannot completely control the journalists, so they are very nervous about how it's going to be portrayed, how they're going to portray, the journalists are going to portray the country to the outside world. The second observation I would say is that I think perhaps the outside world does not appreciate just how fierce the competition is among groups in North Korea. And I'm not talking about the high-level decision makers. I'm talking about the working level people, the people, people like me would interact with if I were in North Korea. And this is particularly true, I think, of people who deal with foreigners. And I think there are a couple of reasons. One is that these people are, this is not a country where you switch jobs easily. You do not go on LinkedIn and find another career. You are stuck in your position, and which also means that the relations with the country that you're dealing with is crucial to your career and your life. So I think this is an important point to keep in mind when dealing with North Korea. And I'll stop there, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Yeah, so thank you.
Great, thank you. And I'm sure there's some questions at the end for Q&A. I was here last year, and we had a North Korea panel. And just looking at last year alone, just consider all that has happened, right? North Korea obviously continues to ramp up the WMD capability. We had a successful military satellite launch in November, only 2 months after Kim's meeting with Putin. Just since January, there was a number of testing. We have North Korea's reversal, or momentous policy shift on renouncing unification and calling South Korea #1 enemy. And the list goes on. And then I think the imagery also picked up the uranium enrichment capability. It's expanding. They just built a new annex. I mean, while the world is distracted with multiple crises and wars that's going on, North Korea is doing their business, right? It continues. The threat is going on. And so some Korea watchers argue that, and we're going to start with you. Some Korea watchers argue that now it's time for Washington to give up unrealistic dream or goal of denuclearization, and that we should really focus on risk reduction, and that we need to now pursue negotiations that are based on interim steps, perhaps give some sanctions relief and whatnot. And this is the sort of let's go on with this new path, like let's drop this unrealistic goal of denuclearization, right? So I'm going to start with you, Ambassador, on some your thoughts and your framing remarks on these thoughts and these issues and the interim steps.
Well, Sumi, I think you put down the background of all these discussions in a very crisp and then comprehensive manner. So my compliments. So that, in fact, has been my observation in the sense that there has been increased interest in negotiating with North Korea. And the negotiation would be for the purpose of suspending North Korea's development of nuclear weapons in return for the lifting of sanctions. And I just follow that and then tell myself, there is nothing new about that. That idea has been tried many times before, in 1994, in 2005, 2006. So that idea has been tried many times before. So it is nothing new. But at the same time, there is something new. And then when I say there is something new, the context has changed. And then the most important change in the context in my mind is the Vostocini meeting, the meeting between Chairman Kim and then President Putin, which took place in September in Vostocini Space Center. And then after that, then of course there has been a lot of report about North Korea providing hundreds of thousands of missiles and munitions to Russia.
Yeah.
In return, it in fact is suspected to get all those energy, materials, military technology, etc., etc. And then that in fact is a new context. And then if in fact we lift sanction against such a context, then there is something we should be concerned about. And then there is another important change in the context, which is this is something we didn't experience in 1994, 2005, or 2006, which is that, well, in the previous sessions, we have been talking a lot about something called rule-based international order, and challenge for the rules-based international order that, in fact, is taking place in a far more serious manner than in the past. So putting them all together, I think we should be concerned about consequence of trying something we tried before. At that time, it didn't work too well. But if we try it now, then it is not only that it doesn't work too well, but at the same time, we in fact would have to be concerned about very serious consequences. And by consequence, I mean this, which is that, well, all those not so new ideas, the reason why they are being discussed about these days is how to reduce tension on the Korean Peninsula. But in my mind, lifting sanction now, it will be leading to raising the tension rather than lowering the tension. The reason being, well, we in fact have to think about, say, two different capabilities of North Korea. Nuclear capability, which is getting stronger and stronger, but at the same time, conventional capability. In the previous session, there was former Vice Defense Minister Shin, who said he's not so much concerned about conventional military capability of North Korea. But that, in fact, could change when you lift sanction in this new context. So I just wish to wrap up by saying, well, of course, nuclear development, missile development, there are important developments taking place in North Korea, but at the same time, we should try to look at North Korea in a very broad context. When I say very broad context, then let's look at North Korea's economy. Let's look at social stability in North Korea. There are many indications that North Korean regime is getting highly concerned about its economy, highly concerned about social stability. So in my mind, these are all the kind of things we have to take into consideration when we have that discussion in Washington, D.C. about lifting sanctions.
I think you make
Let
really
me stop here.
excellent points about, so when I was giving this list of just things were happening in the past year, you didn't mention domestically the economic situation that's pretty serious and dire. And then what I didn't get into, and I'm glad you mentioned this, is this changing geopolitical environment that's actually favorable for North Korea in that China and Russia are not doing anything to help. In fact, we know that China abstained and Russia vetoed the panel of experts, right? Like they are doing everything they can to not help, and while there's this now alliance, right? And you have Russia and North Korea's burgeoning ties, which makes the environment very different. And besides what you were talking about, this interim idea has been tried before. So thank you. Thank you for that. I'm going to come back to you, so let's just go to Dr. Bennett. Let's get into this basic question of how large of nuclear force does North Korea actually have, what it's trying to build, and why are we not doing anything about it?
I think we have to face the fact that we don't know how many nuclear weapons North Korea has. That's the first thing to say. Second thing, we can estimate at least the critical nuclear materials they've made that could be converted into nuclear weapons. They may not have done that conversion yet because they may not yet have a reliable design for a nuclear weapon that can be carried by their various delivery means. They've implied they do, but we don't know for sure. That said, we're probably something in the 50 to 100 weapons worth of critical nuclear material today. And it's pretty clear Kim is going for 300 to 500 or more nuclear weapons. He's not building new capacities that he plans to shut down in a year or two because he's got plenty. He's going to be moving ahead and in fact claims to be exponentially increasing what he is producing. So, okay, why isn't the US and South Korea trying to do something about that? Well, that's hard. Do we even know where all the facilities are? We may not, certainly not publicly. Do we know, or do we have any leverage of negotiating with the North on this? Well, it's pretty clear the North has said it has no intention of denuclearizing. It's not going to go to zero. In fact, it's building up. My guess is that at least in the interim measures the State Department and the National Security Council have been talking about, we need to be addressing the process of trying to freeze the North Korean production process. But that means identifying facilities and being able to inspect facilities that are frozen. And people will say, well, then we've got to recognize they've got nuclear weapons. Well, I'm not sure we do. We don't have to recognize whatever it is they have because that's highly uncertain. I think what we have to be prepared to say is just don't produce anymore. I think a world with 300 to 500 North Korean nuclear weapons is a bad nightmare because it will threaten the US, it will threaten South Korea, it will threaten Japan, but with the range of missiles they're developing, it may well threaten our European allies and others. So this is a world we can't go to. What does the administration need to do? Well, first of all, they've got to get creative. Sanctions help. The sanctions help because North Korea may not be getting all of the components for missiles and for nuclear weapons that they want. The components they may be getting may be unreliable and in bad condition. So they're facing some challenges with those things. But that's not going to stop them. I think we have to take a very serious attitude on trying to coerce them into stopping. I think we have to do that by taking advantage of information. Look at Kim right now. He is absolutely terrorized by outside information. He said that K-pop is a vicious cancer that could cause his regime to collapse like a damp wall. When he tells you what his vulnerability is, why aren't we exploiting it and taking advantage of that? But we haven't chosen to do it in part, I believe, because we're worried about his escalation if we do that he could escalate in a variety of ways. But I hate to say it, if you look at what the national intelligence community released in June last year of a national intelligence estimate on North Korean nuclear weapons, it said Kim is most likely to use nuclear weapons for coercive purposes. That's really what we expect. And coercive purposes isn't 200 or 300 at a time. It's 1 or 2 or maybe 3 at a time. And are we prepared to deal with that kind of use? And are we trying to convince him that it would be a really bad idea to do that? I don't think the current deterrent posture is appropriate for convincing him not to do that, which we can get into in more detail. But I think the US has got to decide, are we better off trying to slow him down or stop him developing when he only has maybe 50 or 100 nuclear weapons? Or do we want to wait until he has 300 or 500 nuclear weapons to try to do that? Probably not a good idea to wait. It probably is time. It's risky. Presidents don't like doing things which are risky for their governments. But it's probably what we need to be doing.
Thank you. Dr. Bennett mentioned this national intelligence estimate, NIE findings on North Korea that was published. It's very unusual that the intelligence community will publish something like that. So I highly recommend, if you have not read it, just takes only like a few pages. But that really sums up US intelligence views assessment on where we are on North Korea. So I'm just going to move to the ambassador here. Dr. Pena just talked about how, quoting that NIE, which said that North Korea may use nuclear weapon or use nuclear weapon for coercive purposes. What is the possibility of a nuclear war breaking out in North Korea?
Yes, I'm glad you raised that question, Sumi. I think the key point I want to get across to everybody today is that that possibility is very real. And I'm getting quite worried by the kind of complacency that has set in, that the North Koreans have these weapons, sure, but they would never actually dare to use them. I think that is wrong. I think it's possible that they would actually pull the trigger. Let's go back a bit and see how we got to where we are. Since the collapsed Hanoi summit in February 2019, but especially since the beginning of 2023, we've seen a whole series, not only of very aggressive weapons tests in North Korea, all kinds of delivery systems, including nuclear-capable ones, but we've also seen a chilling shift in their rhetoric, both to an international audience and domestically, to talk about a preparation for actual war. This is unusual, caught eyes at the time, but perhaps didn't cause the frisson that it should have done. Things got worse. In December last year, the plenum agreed that South Korea was no longer a consanguineous country, no longer Korean brothers. This was a separate state and was a hostile state. Now, that move was important because internally, legally, in North Korea, that clears the way for an attack. Under the Constitution, it would have been very difficult for Kim Jong-un to actually launch an attack against a country with which they was formally still linked by blood brotherhood. He stopped that and cleared the way. 11 January, two of the greatest experts from North Korea, Sig Hecker and Bob Carlin, publish an article that caused a tremendous flurry where they track back over all these statements and say, given where we got to, we think that North Korea has actually taken the strategic decision for war. Naturally, the North Korean Washington community reacted rather like the medieval Catholic Church faced with a heresy, and article after article poured out saying, no, this can't be right, of course they're not, no, this isn't what the consensus says. But I fear that most of what they argue is justifiable and defensible. I personally am not convinced that Kim Jong-un has taken a strategic decision for war. I think at this stage he is scoping out his options, but very definitely leaving the possibility of an attack on South Korea on the table. I'll come back to that a little later. Since then, we have seen any number of new tests, and most recently, 10th April, we had Kim Jong-un photographed standing in front of a model of Seoul, instructing his military to get ready for a real war, not a hypothetical war, and a war that must be won. Was there any part of that message that we didn't understand? Yesterday, Kim Jong-un goes driving around in a multiple launch rocket system and fires off a sniper rifle. The messaging couldn't be clearer. The guy is gearing up for an attack. Worse, if this is right, if he is planning to, as he would see it, complete the revolution, overrun South Korea, he's now depleted his conventional arsenal. He's given a great part of it to Russia, which means that it's hard to see how he would do this without actually using tactical nuclear weapons, perhaps in a first strike. Why is he doing this? Kim Jong-un faces three big problems to which he has no real answer. The first is his economy. It is stuttering at best. We have food insecurity. Food insecurity got worse since the pandemic. Before the pandemic, harvests were coming in about 5.2 million tons. The best harvest we've had since the pandemic, which was last year, was only at 4.8, so 400,000 tons short of their requirements. And the first thing he promised the Korean people was that there would be no return to famine. He's on the hook. Worse, at the Singapore summit, he showed Singapore in the background to his drive around. Now, the significance of that, I think, was missed at the time, but essentially, he was offering North Koreans a vision of a prosperous future, bright lights, prosperity, and all kinds of goodies. He hasn't delivered, he's on the hook, this is trouble. Remember that in North Korea, you get riots, you get public disturbances, and the North Korean regime is constantly worried about these things. A failure to deliver economically risks that. That's his first problem. The second is erosion of control, erosion of legitimacy. Over the last 2 years in particular, he has talked incessantly about the need for more ideological education. Remarks suggesting very strongly that what is happening is he's sitting pulling the strings in Pyongyang, and nothing very much is happening. Cadres are simply far too busy trying to make money to carry out his orders. There was an extraordinary moment at the end of the pandemic when they had a kind of, I suppose you call it a military conference, where different units talked about the contribution they'd made to bringing the pandemic to an end. And officers were saying, of course, first when I got the orders, I gave them to my soldiers, and they just ignored them. And I had to really insist that they go out and do this. North Korean soldiers simply ignoring orders, things got to that state already. It follows from that, Professor Bennett was mentioning, corrosive foreign influences, an undermining of the legitimacy of the regime, and a constant fear that the regime is simply not going to be able to command the loyalty of its citizens when it needs to. This is a cancer to which he has no answer. The third problem, which is much harder to define, is that something is clearly going wrong right at the top of the regime. Appearing all the time with your 8-year-old daughter is simply bizarre. Now, I think 1 or 2 appearances could be explained by a wish to show a great father figure thing, but he goes with her all the time. What's he trying to do? Is he worried about the succession? Is he worried about the fighting off his own sister against a possible branch line of succession? We don't know, but you do get the strong impression that he is not a happy man right now. Now, he doesn't have many options. He's cut off the possibility of a new relationship with the United States. He's getting everything he could reasonably expect from China, which still isn't covering his bills. He knows that the new relationship with Russia will come to an end with the Ukraine war, and he can't count on Russian support beyond that. One of the few options he has is to either extort money from South Korea or to overrun the place. I mean, this sounds crazy, but in North Korea, people quite possibly are thinking like this. If he does that, not only does he solve his economic problems, because of course he can then just pillage the South Korean economy, but he solves his problems of legitimacy. He is the national hero who has reunited the Korean people. Briefly, what can we do? Deterrence, very important, but it only works if North Korea believes that we would actually use nuclear weapons in response to a strike on South Korea. We don't know that they do believe that. The old men who run North Korea have a kind of echo chamber effect. They have deep contempt for the United States, particularly since Afghanistan. And it's quite possible that they simply don't believe that, threatened with the destruction of American cities, that the United States would actually use its nuclear umbrella to come to the aid of South Korea. Do we in any case believe that Kim Jong-un's generals are telling him that he can't use his shiny new weapons? You'd be very brave to do that. We need to reach these people. We need to message all we can. That they're not picking up the phone, as we all know. There are ways of reaching senior officials in North Korea through third parties. We should explore those. Perhaps the single most important thing is to work with China. President Xi Jinping has made clear repeatedly, and indeed Major General Yun made clear in the previous session, China really doesn't want a nuclear peninsula and would be dead against the actual use of nuclear weapons. It's a common interest, a strongly shared common interest between the United States and China, and I hope that the Northeast Asia Working Group set up during Blinken's visit will be addressing this. Finally, the only way longer term that we can solve this conundrum is to switch North Korean policy back. It started with an abandonment of relations with the United States. If somehow we can change the leadership's mind and assure them that a relationship with the United States that's not completely confrontational is possible, then we'll have made real progress. Thank you.
Okay. So let's hear from Professor Suhao. Bruce Bennett said North Korea has no intention of denuclearizing, but you say denuclearization should be a starting point. Then you hear Ambassador just talking about how China needs to be brought in. China is part of sort of the solution.
Yes. First of all, let me express my thanks to Asan to invite me to attend this great event.
Yes.
Well, I feel a bit nervous because I was the final, last presenter, not only in this panel, but also in this plenum. This topic is very challengeable to Chinese, right? So, but I will try my best. Actually, I think that when we're discussing about the international security situation in Chinese policy research, we always say that NPT, the principle of non-proliferation, is really the cornerstone for the international security framework. So this is a real principle of Chinese foreign policy to manage our, nuclear strategic, decision. So in this context of Chinese security concern, I would say that the nuclearization of the North Korea reveals the challenge to Chinese security policy decision making. Actually, tell you the truth, actually, we say between China and North Korea, there are some differences regarding the nuclear process. As I mentioned, that China will stick to adhere seriously to the non-proliferation and denuclearization as our principles to manage our relation with our neighborhood, including North Korea and Northeast Asia. But unfortunately, so far, North Korea already weaponized. So make it big trouble. Actually, tell the truth, from Chinese feeling, not only to the Northeast Asia, but also for China, also feeling some kind of the challenges to us. So this reason why we're very clear and strong position to stick to the denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula, including North Korea, of course, related with others like the United States. But from my personal observation, I would say that some time ago, we discussed about nuclear issues. We talked quite a lot about denuclearization, right, in Korean Peninsula. But now, it seems to me that there's some kind of the strategic drift from the denuclearization to the nuclear confrontation, or even the nuclear deterrence or nuclear balance over the Korean Peninsula. So I think this is a bad situation, even worse, to the regional security situation for us. So I'm thinking that in the context of the nuclear weaponization in Korean Peninsula, or in particular conducted by North Korea, which country will gets the benefit? Who will be the winner in the context of weaponization, nuclear weaponization conducted by North Korea? Of course, first nation is North Korea. First country is North Korea, of course, because of the weaponization. So Korean Peninsula, division of the Korean Peninsula had been divided or frozen, in the long term, which is the good situation to the North Korea, not only to Kim Jong-un as the political leader in North Korea, but also it's good to consolidate the North Korea's political regime or the system. So it's good for North Korea. But how about the other? Personally, frank speaking, I would say that maybe United States is also the beneficiary state or country. Of course, we know that denuclearization also the principles of American foreign policy, but weaponization of a nuclear process in North Korea also create a security situation which is in favor to the United States to, of course, on the one hand, make the North Korea pose a great threat towards the South, but on the other hand, United States offers the nuclear umbrella, as Ambassador mentioned that, over the South Korea. So draws South Korea towards the United States, so that the United States built a huge, Indo-Pacific coalition strategically, targeted on China, frankly speaking. So I'm not sure I'm wrong or not. Please correct me. So in this regard, United States also gets some kind of benefit, by this way. Of course, the third is Russia. In the context of the North Koreans' weaponization, so Russia also, have some kind of strategic backyard from their, Far East, so that they can focus on their, on the West in the Ukraine war. So, and there has a mutual, interaction strategically between the two countries. And the fourth, I would say that maybe somehow Japan. So these kind of tensive situations in the context of nuclear weaponization in North Korea, so make the Japan has some kind of the, opportunity to pursue the militarized in their strategic architecture, or even somehow to leave some kind of option, maybe in the foreseeable future, of their, weapon nuclear, option actually. So how about the other? Just only two countries have been damaged in this context. Of course, one is South Korea. We know that South Korea already has a very serious threat immediately from the north, so created a very serious situation. Tensive, not only tensive, but ad hoc, big challenges to the North Korea's national security. And of course, the second I would say, regarding the DPRK, by this kind of the way to make the South Korea strategically, take side with the United States, and somehow make the problem between Korea and DPRK with China. And of course, in the long run, reunification cannot be achieved easily, by this, in this context. And the second damaged country is China. Of course, I would say that China stick to its denuclearization, but we, somehow cannot be, implemented our policy, and also somehow this kind of the nuclear postures in North Korea or make some trouble to China. As Bruce mentioned that, weaponization in North Korea not only makes a threat towards others, but also to make trouble to China. The local people in boundary area, neighboring with Korea, also feel scareful about the North Korea because, sometimes when the nuclear test conducted by Korea, many local people in the northeast of China, neighboring with Korea, also feel very much scareful, so it's a real trouble. So I would say that in this context of the nuclear weaponization in North Korea, so some kind of changeable games at the moment right now. So I'm thinking that we should redefine or somehow go back to the origin of the logic of security dimension in Northeast Asia and over the Korean Peninsula. I would say that we should go back to the denuclearization as a principle rather than nuclear confrontation and extensive deterrence.
Okay, thank you. A lot of interesting comments here. I think our American colleagues who might want to respond to your comment that nuclear North Korea is actually beneficial to the United States just because we're able to provide nuclear umbrella to South Korea. I think there will be some pushback on that issue. And your point about going back to the original concept of denuclearization, I mean, a lot has happened over the years, hasn't it? But since you brought up Japan, let's now go to you, Dr. Naoki, on maybe on the trilateral cooperation part, what they have achieved, what have they done, what could they be working on further, and anything you want to comment on after you're hearing this panel.
Thank you. Thank you. So I would like to touch on the trilateral cooperation among the United States, South Korea, and Japan, which is one of the an important way to deter North Korea from taking actions that are unfavorable for the three countries. So obviously, the three countries have made great progress over the last year or so in increasing their cooperation, and one of those efforts is the political top-level political commitment that was shown in the Camp David summit. And that is important because it's a political commitment. It's a message for North Korea to try to convince North Korea that it cannot get away with certain things. Of course, this is not going to mean that North Korea is going to stop all of its missile tests. It's not going to mean that North Korea is going to stop everything that is unfavorable to the three countries, but it could help shape North Korea, complicate North Korea calculations and try to convince North Korea to refrain from certain actions. Another point is the fact that the three countries have implemented some of the commitments that were made in the Camp David summit. For example, the joint military exercises. Trilateral aerial exercises used to be, there were trilateral exercises. For example, in 2017, there were multiple show of force flights involving the three countries, but they were not truly integrated because Japanese aircraft would escort U.S. Aircraft on one leg, and South Korean aircraft escorted U.S. Aircraft on another leg. So you would not see a picture of three countries' aircraft together. That is no longer the case. So they've had three trilateral aerial exercises that were truly integrated. 3 points, just very briefly, 3 points of what they can do more on. And one is the coordination, increased coordination, particularly given Japan's investment in counterstrike capabilities. This means Japan is going to have capabilities to reach North Korea. Obviously, this will not be used unless North Korea initiates an attack. But of course, if you think about the possibility of Japan doing that, then coordination with the United States and South Korea becomes even more important. Secondly, South Korea and Japan could work more together bilaterally. I think the incident in December 2018, you may remember the incident in which Japan accused a South Korean destroyer of using targeting a fire control radar on a Japanese surveillance aircraft. The South Korea denies that happened. This is still an issue between the two forces, and this is preventing some of the regular exchanges between the two. The Japanese maritime self-defense forces and the South Korean Navy have resumed, but not all of them have. So this is another area that the three countries can work on. Lastly, I think there was some discussion about how deterrence does not work unless North Korea believes that the three countries are working together, or unfavorable developments will happen for North Korea if they take certain actions. I think we should assess North Korean interpretation of various trilateral cooperative events, and so to be clear, I'm all for more trilateral integrated exercises, but we should also try to assess what works best and what doesn't work as well. Thank you.
Okay, great. We have a last speaker, Mr. Morimoto Satoshi. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to turn to you for your framing remarks. I think it's on.
It's very sorry to be late. I skipped from this meeting room to another place for another business. So I'm sorry I couldn't follow up a whole discussion. Yeah, but basically, for the first of all, I would like to my extremely basic position to make for the first time. Okay. Maybe North Korea's strategic goal the survival of Kim regime and the experience of influence over the US and South Korea. A strategic nuclear weapon are the most important means for them. At the 8th Party Congress in 2021, North Korea has set the deployment of nuclear attack capability for preemptive and retaliatory strike, tactical nuclear and solid fuel ballistic missile, and military reconnaissance satellite are top priority. I think they have almost four times by the end of this year. Toward that goal, we are continuing to develop a nuclear modernization effort. The North Korea has been promoting the provision of arms and ammunition to Russia, hoping that Russia's victory in the Ukraine war. To date, North Korea has provided Russia with a dozen of short-range ballistic missiles, maybe KN-23, with a range of 550 miles, more than 1 million rounds of ammunition. But another speculation is that they already supplied 2.5 million rounds of ammunition. As you know, Russia uses 10,000 ammunition per day. So Russian can make operational fire by exclusively North Korea ammunition by almost 8 months. In return, maybe North Korea appear to be requesting the provision of related technology, resources, and material, such as nuclear and ballistic missile, military reconnaissance satellite, and nuclear submarine. In response, it is unclear whether Russia is providing military sensitive advanced technology to North Korea. On the other hand, Russia is helping North Korea diplomatically by devoting the resolution to tighten sanctions against North Korea at the United Nations Security Council, as you know. The North Korea seems to believe that if Russia wins the Ukraine war, North Korea's contribution is more highly valued. On the other hand, assuming that if North Korea is defeated, the influence of the US is expecting to decline. China, Russia, and North Korea are strengthening cooperation to strategically confront the cooperation between US, South Korea, and Japan, and security advantage. If so, one would expect that North Korea would have a stronger deterrence function. North Korea has officially denied a first strike with nuclear weapon. Therefore, maybe, however, to size the initiative in an emergency, the United States is planning to use the tactical nuclear weapon first in anti-forces attack to prevent the escalation. Furthermore, North Korea has abandoned its previous policy of peaceful unification with South Korea and has shifted to a strategy that aims for the withdrawal of U.S. forces and armed unification of Korean Peninsula. The North Korea has always modernized the nuclear forces with emphasis on a punitive deterrence to provide the function on deterrence by denial, integrated missile and air defense capability, IAMD, and the early warning system are required, which would require enormous cost and advanced technology for North Korea. In the end, the North Korea will prioritize the means of punitive deterrence and build up its nuclear forces. The North Korea is a member of state NPT, as you know. It is not, he is not permitted to develop nuclear weapon, but it has conducted 6 nuclear tests since October 2006. The nuclear problem, as a nuclear problem, we don't know. However, the North Korea is estimated to have up to 40 nuclear warheads and enough fissile materials to manufacture more than 50 number. The North Korea recently declared that its status as a nuclear weapon state has now becoming irreversible. And there is a responsibility that it may resume nuclear tests to demonstrate its capability.
Okay.
Okay?
Can we?
Just one
sure.
minute. Therefore, South Korea and the US and Japan must respond effectively to this nuclear threat from North Korea. In this end, the first step is build integrated air and missile defense system can effectively respond to the nuclear first strike by North Korea. Additionally, THAAD missile and SM-3, PAC-3 MSE, and intermediate range ballistic missile system, as well as the early warning system, information sharing system, satellite constellation required to these systems will be needed. Therefore, the US, Japan, South Korea early missile warning date sharing mechanism issued in December 2023 is extremely effective. I stop at
Okay,
the stop
thank
my,
you.
My
So we only have 20 minutes, and I want to be able to engage with the audience. So we're going to turn to you guys very soon. So please have a question ready. I know Ambassador An also had a question, so I'm going to come to you in 1 second. But I did want actually Bruce to follow up on this comment about Russia, North Korea, and China, just because your quote, you wrote this about Russia, China, North Korea testing their military resources, and I remember reading this quote about this dangerous informal tripartite pact between China, Russia, and North Korea, and how these countries could even convert Ukraine, because this came up, into Russia, China, North Korea laboratory, I think that was your word, for examining and improving various weapons and tactics in actual warfare. So for North Korea, not only are they sending weapons to Russia to be used in the battlefield, for our purposes, North Korea gets to even test their weapons, and they learn from that, which is an additional problem, right? So I don't want to, if you want to just comment on that quickly, and then I'll come to you for your question.
Sure. I think we have to recognize that during the 1980s, North Korea was very adroit at playing Russia and China off against each other and exploited them to the max that it could. It now appears to be trying to shift into the same kind of mode, and so we have to be guessing exactly what all that is, but I think there's some pretty clear things that if I were North Korea, I would want to be getting from them. One of them is, there's a big difference between taking a missile out to White Sands and launching it over White Sands and taking it to a battlefield and launching it on a battlefield and seeing what damage it does to your adversary. Did the warhead really work? How did it work? How could we improve it? And I think that's very much what North Korea is almost certainly doing in the Ukraine kind of context. That they're not just sending munitions, they're sending some of their own people to go along with, to observe, to take notes on what has happened actually on the battlefield. I don't have evidence of that, but I think they've got to be trying to do that kind of thing. And then I think you've got to ask from that, well, so why aren't we taking advantage of that? You know, these people from North Korea going to fight in Ukraine aren't going to be hostile class in terms of their songbun. They're going to be elites, probably close to the top of the elites, in order to be adequately reliable. And here they are in Ukraine, away from family, away from friends. Why aren't we trying to use information to reach them and to communicate to them and to provide them ideas that would question their life at home in North Korea? I mean, maybe what we do is convince Kim Jong-un not to do that in the future by taking that approach. But the reality is we have an opportunity. We ought to be taking advantage of that opportunity. I haven't heard that we are. I suspect we're not, but we really should. There are many opportunities where we can try and reach the elites in North Korea. And let's face it, I mean, you know, you want to have a unification with North Korea at some point, you better make sure you've got the elites in North Korea that have agreed that they want to have it too, or they're not going to let it happen. So we need to be working on a consensus of our ideas of what the future might hold.
Thank you. Ambassador On, you had a question for a fellow panelist.
Bennett, you're popular. So let me raise one question with you as well.
Sure.
Well, in your original statement, then you said, well, do we do something right now when North Korea is suspected to have 500 to 100 warheads, or do we wait until 300? So that's a rhetorical question you raised. And then, of course, well, everybody would agree. We will have to do something at 50 to 100. But you didn't, in fact, elaborate about what we should be doing, right? And then in your first intervention, then you talked about K-pop, how K-pop are popular in North Korea. And then in your second intervention, you talked about, well, access to North Korean elite or sub-elite, why we should be taking full advantage of that. And I was reminded of something we used to say, dime. Dime, the four different channels offered by diplomacy, information, military, and economic sanction, right? So that, in fact, is something which came up in my mind. But at the same time, I agree with you. We must do something at 50. But at the same time, I very much appreciate if you could elaborate your ideas about the whole package of things we could be doing. And then just to save time, I just want you to raise one question with Ambassador Everard, which is, Ambassador Everard, you in fact talked about at least 3 reasons or 3 incentives that Kim Jong-un would have to in fact use nuclear weapons, like economy going very bad, and social instability, and even personal insecurity. And then if Kim Jong-un believes that extended deterrence of the United States is in word only, is not going to happen, then of course it will open the floodgate for Kim Jong-un. He in fact would be using his nuclear weapons, right? And then that in fact comes down to why it is so important to further strengthen extended deterrence. But at the same time, John, you didn't elaborate about how we could be doing it, how we could be further strengthen extended deterrence. So that's a question for you.
But before you answer those 2 questions, I'm going to see if the audience and members have any questions. Chae-gang. So remember those 2 questions because you both have homework. I'm giving you time to think about the answers.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I was going to raise, there's a question in the flashpoint session, but I was not able to attend that session. That's why I'm taking this opportunity to raise a question. I'd like to hear the Chinese participant response about the 2016 PCA ruling on the 9-line. So how do you interpret the PCA's ruling? In my memory, I think the PCA said that only the 20 nautical miles from each island can be regarded as a territorial water of China, but the other area, wide area of South China Sea, is open to anyone. Do you accept, because actually I know the China signed the UNCLOS as a member of United Nations. How do you interpret the PCA's ruling? Thank you.
Tuyeon.
Thank you. Thank you, Dooyeon Kim, Center for New American Security. I also want to pose a question to Bruce. I want to press you a little bit further on a point that you made, that you say we need to coerce Kim Jong-un to give up its nuclear weapons, and you cited information campaigns as an example. My 2-part question is, 1, under what circumstances should the United States be employing a strategy of compellence rather than deterrence? And 2, and this kind of touches upon your point about the need for coercion, taking that a bit step forward, what are your thoughts on left of launch scenarios and the ramifications and consequences if the United States chose to execute that? Thank you.
I'm going to take one more question, this gentleman right here, and then we'll take this, if we have time, we'll come back for a second round of questions. Go ahead.
Thank you. Francisco Gonzalez, Embassy of Colombia. Dr. Bruce, you mentioned that in order to tackle the challenges, probably it's time to be creative. And listening to not only this panel, but other panels today, the feeling is that there is only one option, and is increasing deterrence. Now, my point, coming from a zone free of nuclear weapons, and being Colombia signatory to the Treaty on Total Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, isn't it about time that we think of other options, other than deterrence, and think of, for example, the situation has changed dramatically since 1953.
Can you form it into a question, please?
And of course,
Yeah.
the point is that now we have different challenges that are technological, and the Security Council should change too. So isn't it about time to think of the other end, of the Security Council and the decision makers, and the way decisions are made in the Security Council? Thank you.
Okay. Bruce, you want to start
Okay.
answering? You got your questions?
Um, yeah, Dime is exactly right. So the diplomatic, information, military, and economic options, you need to identify them. If you look at the report that we did with Asan that we released in October last year, there are literally dozens of options across that spectrum that we lay out, including several involving how do we make parity between the nuclear weapons committed against North Korea versus the nuclear weapons that North Korea has available, so that they don't see that they've got an asymmetric advantage. I'd be happy to talk about that in more detail when we've got time. In terms of deterrence, compellence, and so forth, there's not one answer. No. You know, across all these things, you have to deter North Korea while you're also trying to compel it to reduce its weapons or at least to stop production. Getting it to stop production, even in a single facility, I mean, I think the Hanoi experience should be very clear that Kim Jong-un doesn't want to go beyond one facility at a time. We have a very difficult time ahead with that regard. Left of launch, I think we need to look at left of launch, but we have to remember left of launch doesn't have to be preemptive. Left of launch means before he launches something. And historically, North Korea built usually 5 to 10 missiles per launcher. So if you could take the launcher out after a first launch, you've been left of launch. There are options that are available potentially that don't have to be preemptive and destabilizing. And we should be doing those. And, you know, in terms of things other than deterrence, if you don't deter while you're taking other actions, you've got a problem. Now, does this mean we need to change the Security Council, which I think was the direction you were trying to go? That's above my pay grade. I'm not there. I'll let others deal with that one politically. I would say, though, that we've got to be taking a multidimensional approach, all at the same time, to put the pressure on the North that is needed.
Okay, Greg, go ahead.
Okay, to answer your question, Hayong, deterrence, it seems to me that we have all the firepower behind a deterrence strategy that we could reasonably ask for. We could actually flatten large parts of North Korea fairly quickly, take out most of the strategic assets with what is already there. To extend it further would add to the point, but would not fundamentally change it. What does need to be fundamentally changed is to convince the North Koreans that we would actually do this. And I think there's a credibility gap there. I am far from convinced that the North Koreans believe that faced with the possible destruction of an American city with a North Korean strategic weapon, that the United States would actually intervene in the peninsula. I think they've convinced themselves that they have intimidated the United States from taking part in a conflict there. And that is a very dangerous situation. How do you change that? It comes back to the point I made right at the end of my presentation. You've got somehow to get to these people and get into their heads that this is real. Sumi, I think it makes me the last speaker in the last panel, right? Or do you have something else to say?
Yes. Well,
Okay. In that happy capacity, firstly, can I add my thanks to all those from other speakers, to Asan for inviting us, but also, can I please ask for a round of applause
okay,
for the
but we're
hidden
not done
heroines?
yet.
No?
We still have some time to go.
Oh, okay. I'll do it at the
We'll
end
do
then.
that in 2 minutes.
Right, okay, you give me a shout.
Yeah, because we have 5 minutes. And we also need to ask Professor Suhao Chegang's question, Dr. Chegang's question to you.
All right,
Do
okay.
you remember?
Well, yes.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate your
Yes.
important question, but which is not a real topic of this panel, right? But thank you to give me an opportunity to explain some Chinese stance about the South China Sea issue, including the 9-dash line. Actually, if you read the Chinese official publication of the maps, now it's the 10-dash line rather than 9-dash line. plus one more, close to the Taiwan outer ocean. Well, of course, I do quite a lot of research about these issues, and from my personal research, not on behalf of Chinese official stance, right? I always say that, or even within the Chinese policy discussion, we always say that the water within the non-dash line is not really the Chinese sovereign water. Okay, so this is a little bit different with some comment from the international mass media. So I think that this is the space for the negotiation, even for the joint usage with the international community, including the United States, have their freedom of navigation, or with Philippines, have some kind of the fisheries, the business in this area. So non-national is not real the Chinese sovereign claims over the hold of the water. But the second, I would say that if you look at a map in Europe, I mean, in Mediterranean area, like the Aegean Sea between Turkey and Greece, you can see it's almost all the islands, within the water belong to Greece rather than to Turkey. So you can imagine that you cannot say that, well, China too much claims the islands or something, in this area, but this is historical legacy, right? So we're thinking something about the history, in East Asia, we have a long time history, okay? So this situation is quite complicated, right? But there's one point I would make clear is that in Chinese strategic thinking, we always discuss something like there's linkage between the north and the south, okay? So like in the modern time, the Korean Peninsula things happen like we call the Jiao War between Japan and China in Korean Peninsula, and then eventually China had to cede Taiwan towards Japan, right? Okay, and also the World War II linkage, between the Japan and Taiwanese, including the Okinawa Islands, and also the Korean War. There also the linkage between the Korean Peninsula and Taiwan. We know the history. So from Chinese strategic thinking, we always take cautious, or even in our strategic preparation, we should try to build a linkage between the Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia. Of course, unfortunately, at the moment, there's still linkage outside of China. So maybe let me just go back to our, the Korean Peninsula issues regarding the
Very briefly.
tri-party,
Yeah.
the framework in the south, and also the so-called trilateral cooperation in the north. But frankly speaking, I don't think there's the reality. Of course, in the south, they already have the Japan, Korea, and the United States have the security, cooperation, coalition, or the summit there, but it's the no strategic coalition in the north. So please, let me explain that China happens and very clear, or even it's not an option to keep our strategic, so-called the coalition with Korea, North Korea and Russia. It's not our strategic interest. So we do not build some kind of the northern triangle.
Okay.
So please,
Thank you.
clarify this kind of points. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, there's a final question. Final two questions, and we have to wrap up. Those two hands in the back.
The tribunal findings in 2016 was very loosely related to the ICA. I read the official website said the award was issued by an arbitral tribunal acting with the secretarial assistance of the Permanent Court of Arbitration. In other words, it's wrong, it's factually wrong to characterize the tribunal's findings as a PCA ruling. We can
Do you have a question?
conversations, we have a difference. I want to put that on record.
Thank you. Is there a question? Only question, please.
I have a question.
Okay.
I just have a question for whichever, Scott Morrissey, U.S. Forces Korea. I just have a question for whichever panelist wants to jump on this about intra-conflict deterrence, deterring the North from using nuclear weapons after war has broken out. Let's stipulate there is a conventional fight in the Korean Peninsula. However we got there. We've got the Washington Declaration on the one hand that says that if North Korea uses nuclear weapons, the regime shall be changed in some way, shape, or form. However, per the ambassador's comments, with all these munitions going to Russia, especially in this context, he faces incredible pressure to use a nuclear weapon to retain the initiative. And in his calculus, he may see more freedom of action going that route. That's a danger. How can we do a better job of preparing for intra-conflict deterrence?
How can we do a better job? Anybody want to take that? Ambassador.
Well, let me just respond by citing one anecdote, and then that anecdote refers to Senator McCain. And then when I used to be ambassador in Washington, D.C., I was attending one of the events at one of the think tanks. And then that question was raised, which is, how could we, further efforts in order to stop North Korea's development of nuclear weapons? And Senator McCain, he said, well, we can do that through further strengthening security alliance between Korea and then the United States. At the time, I said to myself, Senator McCain was trying to evade the question. But after all these years, then I think that, in fact, was the right answer. So that's my anecdote in response to that point. Thank you.
Okay, I think that wraps up. You know, most people know I am now working, I'm at Council on Foreign Relations. They are notorious for exact timekeeping, so I think I have failed by 1 minute. But we're supposed to conclude at 5:40. I know you wanted to say,
Yes.
you wanted to give a thanks?
I want to give a thanks. I want to give a thanks to the Asan Institute, to Professor Yoon and all his kindness, but also, please, to the hidden heroines of this event, to Hannah Zhang and her team, who've worked tirelessly for long hours to make this event such a success and to keep us all so comfortable and safe. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Chae-gang. Thank you to Asan for, and thanks to everybody for obviously, thank you for hosting, but thanks for everybody for staying and participating actively in this discussion, and thank you to the panelists. Thank you. This concludes the session.